Earlier this morning, the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments in a case on whether age verification laws, which restrict children's access to pornography, violates the First Amendment. Now, the state of Texas was defending its common sense restrictions on pornography by making users just verify that they were old enough to access sexually explicit materials. But of course, these days, common sense, not so common. So what was the outcome of the day? Well, here in studio to share about the case and how arguments went is the Attorney General of the state of Texas, Ken Paxton. General Paxton, welcome to Washington Watch. Good to see you back.
Hey, it's great to be back. A little chilly here, though.
It is a little chilly outside. This is the long underwear season. All right. So give us your take on, first off, let's go back. I did talk about this last week and the fact that your case was coming up today, but for the sake of our viewers and listeners, what was this case about?
So last session, a year and a half ago, the legislature, actually Senator Paxton, my wife, passed a bill that required age verification for pornography websites. And we started, and it gave my office the ability to enforce that. And we realized that these sites were not doing age verification. They were ignoring the law, so we started suing them. They started suing us back, and they picked a friendly federal court, and they actually got an injunction stopping us from enforcing this law, which merely required, as you said, age verification. So you had to be at least 18 years or older, and they formed what was called a free speech coalition. Sounds good, right? To argue that we were violating their free speech rights. So we actually got an injunction against us. We went to the Fifth Circuit. We got a stay of the injunction, which meant we could now enforce it.
Right.
And then they appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court to get their injunction back.
All right, so we don't restrict anything else that people under 18 do, right?
No, as you all know, tobacco, firearms, you can't contract until you're 18. You can't get married. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we protect. We protect the military. We protect kids because their brains aren't fully developed and they just need time to grow up.
So we prevent them from making decisions that would have long-term implications.
That's exactly right.
And if I'm not mistaken, and I haven't looked at the number lately, but it was about 17, 18 states that declared pornography as a public health crisis because of the longevity of the issues involved here.
Yeah, and that's another reason I think the legislature made the decision. Look, it wasn't controversial to pass this bill. Even I think most of the Democrats voted for it. It's a bipartisan bill. I think they want their kids protected too. And even the other side, this so-called, free speech coalition, acknowledged in the arguments that the state has a compelling interest to protect kids and that they should protect kids from pornography. However, they argue out of the other side of their mouth, well, this isn't a good way to do it. The reason it's not a good way to do it is because it's effective.
It's effective.
It works. So I think even they understand that the public is behind this idea of protecting children, so they can't argue that it's not a compelling state interest, but they're trying to get out of it in another way by saying, well, you just can't do it that way.
Now, I know that a court setting is much different. You stay focused on the issue at hand. The issue of hand was the First Amendment. Did this violate the First Amendment? But in this process, anywhere along the line, did it come up in terms of how profitable the pornography industry is and how much money they make?
It only came up actually in the case today. One of the justices, I think it was Alito, that brought up the fact that this argument they were making didn't make a lot of sense, except it clearly was motivated by profit. And look, I'm free market, I'm good with profit, but not at the expense of children and the consequences that you're talking about for the rest of their lives. So yes, it came up, and I'm sure in the debate on the House and the Texas and Senate and House, I'm sure that came up, but it did actually come up in the arguments today.
Your sense on how the arguments went today?
I thought it was fantastic. I mean, getting into the legal details of whether we apply strict scrutiny or rational basis, that's no one really cares. I don't even care. I just care that they find a way to allow us to enforce our law. And whether they were talking about if it falls in the category of strict scrutiny, maybe there's a place for this anyway, or if we do rational basis, there's definitely a place, or we might be able to create another category. But either way, as I think it was Justice Kavanaugh said, I don't care what you call it, we just need to find a way to do this. And I think that's where they're going to go.
Well, that's encouraging because there are a lot of other states waiting to see what happens with your case.
That's right, and they mentioned it. I mean, some of the more liberal justices mentioned, like Keegan was like, well, asking the free speech, what would be acceptable? We got all these states, and they said, well, I don't want to, guess on what I think. And she said, no, you know what's out there. I mean, these states are pretty similar on what they're, is any of this okay? And he kind of bypassed it and said, well, it's not for me to decide what they should do. But he obviously is deciding by trying to stop us from implementing what the people wanted.
Well, once again, Texas kind of leading the way on this. Last week I was talking to the Attorney General of Tennessee, who I think they may have filed an amicus in your case, but they are clearly waiting to see how this goes because they have a similar law. What's the timeline here? Is this going to be June, July before we hear something?
They did not disclose that to us, the Supreme Court. It seems to me like it's a case that seemed like they were all pretty close. Even some of the more liberal justices accepted that something should be allowed by the state. So it's just going to be a matter of these little legal nuances and how they think that affects future cases. So I think I'm going to be surprised if it's one of the cases that they get over with sooner rather than later.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's one of the areas that, well, I got to be careful in how I say this because yesterday we had a women's girls sports bill on the House floor, and I was going to say that's where people come together, but was not the case yesterday. Hopefully, it'll be the case here with the case that you argued today on restrictions on access to pornography. General Paxton, always great to see you. Thanks for coming by the studio today.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.